Hi, everyone. This is the final installment in our series of short PowerPoints about advertising in the 1920s. And in this one, I want to talk about racism in advertising in the 20s. I hope you noticed, looking at the illustrations in the previous PowerPoints, all of the advertisements, all the illustrations I used have something in common. And that is the people that you see are exclusively white. By and large, print illustrations, print advertising depicted a world absent of people of color, completely white depiction of the world. When people of color, when Black Americans in particular, did appear, they were depicted in ways that drew upon racist stereotypes and tropes dating back went much earlier in the 19th century. This illustration I have here on the title slide for Uncle Remus syrup is an example of that, and we're going to look at a couple more. So one of the most persistent stereotypes in advertising in this era was what historians and film historians too have called the Miami Stereotype. And you saw this in silent films of the 20s. Once you got sound in motion pictures by the late 1920s, this continued through the 30s, 40s, well into the 50s. This was a persistent stereotype. I suppose the best known example would be the one popularized by the film Gone with the Wind from 1939, which is truly an offensive movie on a variety of levels, in spite of the fact that it remains so popular. But this is an example you see for Servel Refrigerator Company, where you have a white couple, smiling on their housekeeper, and the way she's dressed is just completely exemplifies this Miami stereotype that was used in print advertising and widely used in film and on radio shows too. But it's an example of what you see when Black people were depicted in advertising. They were placed within these sorts of stereotypical depictions. And you could find this in all sorts of advertising. This is an example that probably seems sort of unusual. This is the Otis Elevator Company. Elevators were a newer thing in the 1920s. And here you've got a white man, seems to be checking into a hotel, and you've got a black bellhop carrying his bags. You look at the depiction, the black person in this ad, he's speaking in this kind of step and fetch it speech pattern. He's depicted as stooped over. His hands are drawn to resemble those of some sort of primate, as is his face. All of this drawing on racist depictions and tropes going well back to the 19th century. And by contrast, the white person here, you'll notice, is standing upright. You look, he's got a newspaper tucked under his left arm, which is a subtle way of indicating literacy, as opposed to the bellhop, who is depicted as really being implied as being illiterate from the way he's speaking. And you'll notice the white person is completely averting his gaze away from this person. He can't be bothered with this. He's depicted as being superior and on a higher level, even though this person is engaging him in conversation, albeit in this stereotype speech pattern, which you saw frequently used in advertising, all sorts of things, cream of wheat, Aunt Jemima, lots of companies that use these sort of illustrations as far back as the 20s also use these sorts of stereotyped speech patterns. But it's an example of how the prevailing depiction of the world through print media, advertising, and illustrations in the 1920s was very much a white-dominated world. White people, Caucasians in positions of power and authority. And when people of color did appear, they were almost always shown in these sorts of stereotype depictions.